Hello, people. It's me, Warwick Western Wright, your altruistic, annoyingly sanctimonious communist friend here. Coming to give you another speech today. I've got some notes here, so I'll be referring to my notes while I'm speaking. This discussion today is basically about identity politics, the psychology of identity politics. Talked a little bit what I see as kind of main schools of thought for manipulating people. I'm going to close up with some kind of what I believe are good advisory notes to help make the world a better place. After I've actually posted this video, I'm hoping people can post some really cool, radical, peaceful ideas to help evolve the world into a better place. So, okay, I'm going to start out by talking about what I call we us politics or identity politics, a little bit about the media circus. I'm going to open up by saying something kind of a bit imaginary, an imaginary situation. We all know, I want to use examples which most people know about, and use some World War II examples about the bad blood between the Nazis and the Jews. Now, as you know, I'm going to talk about this in 3 levels of enlightenment. So let's talk about level 1. Applies on notes. So let's measure. Level 1 was obviously you got like the Jews believed that the Nazis were fascists. Of course, the Nazis believed that the Jews were greedy money lenders and to things which could be amount to debt slavery. Let's go. This is kind of a prejudice type of thing, obviously, between these two groups, going back a long time ago. Let's look at level 2, something which is kind of a higher level of enlightenment to do with identity. Let's say, what if you had a world where the Jews realized that they were getting maybe a bit too greedy with their money lending model? So of course it's a bit prejudiced because it's not just Jews in general, it's money lenders in general. Not all money lenders are Jews, but that's how racism works. It works on kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, generalization. So imagine as we generalize, let's say the Jews realize they're getting a bit too greedy with their money lending model. And let's say, what if the Nazis realised that they probably borrowed off of the Jews, for example? Self-realisation on a group level. That could have made it a bit more peace. And let's look at the highest, most enlightened level of enlightenment. What if Jews and Nazis, all people of the world, gave up their identity completely? Selflessness. And I'm saying this because identity is a prerequisite to racism. Identity is a prerequisite to war. So what I'm kind of going to be talking a lot about this post is trying to use this talk to guide people into understanding the enlightenment of letting go of their identity. And what I'm speaking about is a bit, I don't know, controversial because I'm going against things which people were brought up to believe very strongly or correctly. And I'm going to try and convince you that some of the things that you were taught which are authoritatively correct, I'm going to try and convince you that they're incorrect. And what I'm going to try and teach you incorrect is that people should have pride in their identity, and I'm trying to say don't have any identity at all. I'm trying to say don't be what's the word I'm looking for? Don't be even patriotic. Don't be, if someone asks you what it means to be British or American, the US or whatever, say it's just something written on my passport that dictates where I can go. I know this is hard to take in because authoritatively people have always taught you authoritatively in big numbers that you should always be patriotic, proud of what you are. But I think this is kind of the root of a lot of the problems because people can't let go of their identity and their selflessness. And identity is one of the ways people are actually manipulated. I'm going to go a bit further down in my notes here. I can think of 3 schools of thought which are used to manipulate people. You've got political ideology, you've got religion, and psychology. Now, I'm not going to talk about the only one I'm really going to talk about mostly today is psychology because it kind of relates to religion and it relates to political ideology anyway. Talk a little bit about the psychology of manipulation. Now, have you ever heard some people, I can't really think of the best idea, so I'm going to come out. Have you ever heard people like generalize and say that like black men have bigger willies than say like white men? Now, you might think this is a silly thing to talk about and very immature and puerile, but I'm going to explain how it relates to identity politics. if I was to generalize and say to a black guy, who knows, like most black people have bigger willies than white people. And the black guy go, yeah, man, that is true, no, and that kind of stuff. Of course, because person's identity as a black person and how it's tied into their ego, which could be compared to their willy. Egos and willies tend to be a bit associated. Or is that just me? Anyway, but the thing is, if you said the same thing to a white person, they would say, no, that's not true. I know some white dudes, some really, really big willies. Now, have you heard that psychological belief, which is put forward authoritatively, that people are taught that in psychology the mind doesn't understand negatives? Well, this isn't actually true. One thing I've learned about psychology is that it's a great manipulation tool, because psychology doesn't actually teach any lies. It teaches what I call conditional truths, because some things are true if you believe they're true. For example, if you believe, like I've always said many times, if you believe love is blind, it will blind you. If you choose to believe it isn't blind, it won't. And the truth is, this thing about the mind and negatives, the mind does understand negatives if you believe it understands negatives. And I've come to realize that psychology is a great tool for manipulation. And I think the major use of psychology in society is to manipulate people. So there's this philosophy that I have. Bruce Lee actually said this, the famous martial artist. He said, if this is true, that is not necessarily false. Now, the thing is, with negatives, so when I say this philosophy and how it relates to this thing with people's willies, for example, now, just because what this philosophy means is, if this is true, that is not necessarily false. In relation to kind of people's willies, if you say that black people have big willies, doesn't mean that you're saying white people have small willies. So this is how psychology and manipulation works. And sometimes you'll get a person's identity and you use negatives. So you say something which suggests the opposite is true. Because people believe that the mind doesn't understand negatives, their mind doesn't understand negatives. So they make the assumption that the negative that you're not saying is that you're saying that white people's willies are small. Now that may sound silly, but it's actually true. It's a very common thing with identity politics is to use negatives and identity. And this is why I like to really blow psychology out of the water, because psychology is greatly built on the foundation of the nature-nurture debate. As you know, one of my favourite sayings is actually completely against the nature-nurture debate, because as you know, I always say a person's beliefs and a person's nature go hand in hand, which actually blows the nature-nurture debate out of the water, which is the very foundation of psychology. Well, that's not the very foundation, but is a very big part of the foundation. So the way to not be manipulated is to respect that a person's beliefs and nature go hand in hand, be extremely careful with the beliefs you take on, and always be conscientious of how it affects your nature. So what I'm saying is, believe Bruce Lee's philosophy. If this is true, that is not necessarily false, rather than believing that the mind doesn't understand negatives. Because if you believe that philosophy instead, then your mind will begin to understand negatives. Of course, you can put it into another philosophical way of thinking, but you kind of get the general gist of how kind of manipulation works. Also, a thing with manipulation is quite fun to use is authority. Like, for example, psychology is science. I see it as a pseudoscience, but people see it as a science. And so if someone wants to manipulate you and they don't like my philosophy about a person's beliefs and nature going hand in hand, they might have a degree in psychology, psychiatry, human behavior, whatever. They've got a piece of paper. This piece of paper gives them authority. So they'll use their authority. Works wrong. No, it's a nature-nurture debate. It's not nature and all that stuff that works. It's person's, yeah. Then it's an abuse of authority, and authority is kind of there for that reason. Or another example of identity politics, so I'll give you another example, going back to World War II. A lot of people in the Western world, actually, before I talk about that, I would talk about, going back to that philosophy that love is blind. Obviously, love is conditionally blind, but hatred can blind people as well. And prejudice can blind people as well. So, for example, an example of this, going back to another World War II philosophy, is that if you talk about, in the history books, kind of suggest that the Nazis were wiped out, not by so much gunfire, but Hitler making the mistake of sending his troops in to fight the shock troops in Russia in the middle of the winter without warm clothes, and the cold weather wiped them out. Now, the Russian side of history is very different to that. And I'm not here to debate which side of the history is true, but what I am trying to say is if a person has identity or any type of prejudice, it dictates what kind of lies you can tell them and what lies they will believe. Now, I look at this part of history, and if you really, really, really think about it, okay, is that actually believable? Is it believable that Hitler was such an idiot that he lost all of his troops, or more or less all of them, to cold weather and not to gunfire? If you really think about it, it's not even a believable lie. But the reason why people believe it is because authority, abuse of authority, and a combination of beliefs. Now, for example, we've heard that belief, the pen is mightier than the sword. Now, in American history books, it's written that, that's basically how the Nazis lost the war. Now, history books are written in, because it's an official, because history books are an official document, that is authority. And so because a person identifies themselves, say, as pro kind of American or pro English or, whoever side won the war, they believe that. The reason they believe that is two. One, it's written in a book. People believe that the pen is mighty than the sword. The book is authoritative, therefore people believe it. Now, it's a ridiculous lie. It's not even believable that the Nazis got wiped out by cold weather. It's not even believable. But people believe it because, one, their identity, they identify with the non-Axis forces because, that's the country they come from. Two, they believe the pen is mighty than the sword. And three, it's written in a book. You see, now if people let go of their identity, if a person said, right, I'm not going to believe the pen is mighty than the sword, I don't believe in the authority of history books, and all it means to be English or American is something something's written on my passport. If you have that frame of mind, you will read that in the history book and you wouldn't believe it. So that's not even a believable lie. But we believe it, and this is an example of how identity and negatives and that kind of stuff. And it's also negatives as well because they hide the Russian side of history. The Russian side of history is different. I'm not going to say what that side is because it's not really the purpose of this post. But I'm trying to explain how beliefs, identity, believing about the pen is mighty sword, believing that about, that kind of stuff. I'm trying to explain how these things make it easy for people to manipulate people, basically. And it comes from identity. In the United States at the moment, as you know, there's a bit of a media circus. I never really pay much attention to the news. To me, it's all propaganda. And I might identify with the Russian side of the news more, but it's actually kind of neither here nor there. It's just a big media circus. The Russians believe the Russian side of the news because they're Russian, and maybe they hide the American side of the history as well, I don't know. Yeah, people in England, America, they believe their side of the story because the other side's hidden, hence the negative and the identity, and they believe their side of the story, and they hold on to this identity, and they get people to really tear into each other and not really see what's going on. I mean, going a bit deeper into it, for example, I mean, if a person can discipline themselves to let go of their identity, debate tables will be a lot more productive because you get this habit of each side thinking the other side is bad. And that all comes from identity, if that makes sense. So anyway, I'm going to go on and read my notes a bit more about these kind of things about identity politics. So if you think about, so that kind of covers really what I really want to say about the psychological side of manipulation. But also with this philosophy about person's beliefs and person's nature go hand in hand, is I've kind of noticed that because it turns psychology on its head so much, I've come to realize that I almost have this belief that the whole world is in a deep trance state where they can be easily manipulated, almost like they're in an unconscious frame of mind and brainwashed by things like psychology and schools of thought. But the belief that I promote a lot about a person's beliefs and a person's nature going hand in hand, it's a belief that's made me explore the power of beliefs more than the power of the mind. A lot of people spend a lot of time exploring the power of the mind. This philosophy has made me explore the power of beliefs, and I've kind of realized that so long as I evolve my system of beliefs so that no one belief contradicts another belief in my system of beliefs, my beliefs are consistent within each other. And so long as I have strong faith in my beliefs, it affects the type of person I am. And I find that I no longer have to explore the power of my mind. As long as I have consistent beliefs and strong faith in my beliefs, my mind will align itself, and I need no mental disciplines whatsoever. But I've also noticed that this belief is an incredible threat to the keyhole of society. And when I started spreading it, I was actually threatened, believe it or not. And I knew straight away why I was threatened, because as soon as I realized the simplicity and beauty of this belief, that it would be a great threat to the key holders of society, a very, very big threat. And this is why I tend to spread it quite a lot. And also another, I'm saying this really for selfish reasons, because of, I suppose, what's going on in my personal life. But a very common belief, a very common belief is guilty by association. And what they tend to do is, if an ideology comes about which people don't like, drink a cup of tea. Typical Englishman. I'll talk about the weather in a minute. When an ideology comes about which corrupt key holders of society don't like, the corrupt key holders of society tend to redefine that ideology to mean something else, and they normally redefine it by using the guilty by association philosophy. So I'm also asking you here to believe that truth is truth no matter whose mouth it comes from, and reject the guilty by association philosophy, because it will affect your nature and affect the nature of the world. Because when like I say, when this ideologies come out, the corrupt key holders of society don't like it, they'll redefine it. As you know, I'm a communist, so I could use communism as an example. They didn't like, obviously, corrupt key holder societies. Western society doesn't like communism because they're opposing ideologies to capitalism. So what they do is they associate communism with Russia, and they make out Russia and the government to be very, very bad, evil dictatorships. So what they're trying to say is, well, this is communism. You know, all these bad things that we give you the impression of what's going on in Russia, this is communism, so it's bad. And I like to try and distract people away from this guilty by association philosophy, and explain that regardless of what you think the Russians were like, whether it's true, it's not, if it's exaggerate, whether it's propaganda or not, the important thing is that the definition of communism is that it's the model for the devolution of capitalism and evolution of a classless, stateless, moneyless societies. The ideology is correct, whatever you may think of the Ruskies or the Chinese or the North Koreans. It is a correct ideology. And there's other examples as well. Sometimes a person will always be slandered. You know, you're saying that the pot always calls the kettle black. So, you know, it's... And I've had some problems with slander towards me lately. And I know that it's because I've been spreading this philosophy about a person's beliefs and nature going hand in hand, because it's a very extreme threat to the corrupt key holders of society. It's as I've explored this belief more and more, as I explored the power of beliefs more and more I realise it's got a real power to wake people up and just snap them out of their little deep trance state that they don't even know they're in. To be honest, nice weather today. But anyway, so what happens is, you know, when this happens, the people, because the reason why it's easy to manipulate them into believing that, you know, communism is bad because of Russian history and that kind of stuff, is because it's in their nature of society to do that. The reason it's in the nature of society to do that is because they collectively believe in guilty by association, you see. So you have to understand that that's kind of how it works. So I need you kind of guys to really learn to discipline yourself, to let go of your identity, and kind of try to ignore the media circus. And, you know, like all those like Trump supporters and Clinton supporters that are kind of tearing into each other at the moment, try and let go of your identity, stop identifying with Clinton and Trump, and see people on a human level what they really are, because, you know, they're all basically people all around the world are good people, you know, and also it's very easy to kind of get pulled into identity politics. It's very, very easy. Really discipline yourself to not kind of let identity get in the way. Another thing also, you've heard this political term being flying around a lot lately. Though I don't, before Trump got elected, I never watched news, really. I didn't take any interest in it. The reason I take interest in it now isn't because I've identified with anything. I still have the same kind of attitude towards politics. It's all identity politics, all manipulation. But I just watch the news a lot now because I find it very entertaining. Since Trump got in power, always seeing what's going on, seeing what the guy says, what he does. It's kind of almost amusing. But anyway, yeah, the world is, I think, potentially is changing for the better at the moment. So anyway, I want to, let's say, for example, like you say fake news, for example. That's the term, little political term that's going around at the moment. Like I say, when a person, I think, I don't know if I getting the wrong impression from what I've heard in the news, but a lot of Clinton supporters, I think, believe that the Russians somehow hacked the American election. Um, and I think this is another example of how identity politics and prejudice and racism kind of work together. I think the people that believe that the Ruskies hacked the election were probably very anti-Russian. I lived in the States during my late childhood, between the age of 11 and 16, during the early 80s, during the Reagan administration. And we were all taught and brainwashed that communism was terrible and all the Ruskies are a bunch of wrong-uns. We were brainwashed with that. I think most of those people that are anti-Russian now and Clinton supporters, they are kind of my age now, and they were brainwashed the same way I was, taught the same things I was in schools. And I think they're so prejudiced against Russians that that's why they believe that the Ruskies hacked the election. Because again, going back to that World War II story about the Nazis getting wiped out by the cold weather, this thing about the Ruskies kind of interfering in American elections and getting Putin in power, that again isn't even a believable lie. It's not even believable. But if a person has prejudice or hatred towards a group, you can tell them the most ridiculous lie and they'll believe it. Another example, if you get like someone that's racist and you say to a racist person, see that black guy over there is a rapist, they'll believe it outright because they already have hatred towards the black man. You could tell them with absolutely no proof whatsoever and they just believe it. You tell a racist person the white guy's a rapist, they'll treat this as a rumour. And this is another thing with identity politics and fake news and what's going on at the moment. I might be wrong, maybe I've got the wrong impression from what the news tells me, but anyway, I want to kind of close up the post with kind of some advice of how we can actually make the world a better place. One is, if you have intellect enough to understand how powerful the philosophy is that I spread about a person's beliefs and nature going hand in hand, spread that around. It'll make a real difference. Try and encourage people to let go of their identity. I know it's hard because we were taught all our life to be patriotic, proud of what we are, yada yada yada. And also, I think also remember the tools of control. Like for example, the part of the advice I can give you about making the world a better place is how to kind of spot a bad person. Also, something which I know I'm kind of jumping from subject to subject because I'm reading my notes, but a lot of people don't realise how powerful a control tool children are. So, in a very subtle way, Western society actually threatens the existence of being able to support our children properly in a way to kind of toe the line and not do things against the government which maybe the government don't like. And it's very hard to see because it's very subtle. They don't threaten you directly. But say the person that spreads philosophies like I do, if I had children, they wouldn't threaten my children literally, oh, we're going to kill your children if you keep saying it. It's not like that. It's like, we can make you unemployed. We can make an excuse to make you lose your job so you can't provide for your children, that kind of stuff. It's very subtle. It's that kind of control. So one of the advice that I can say to people that want to help make the world a better place is that if you want to be a little bit political active like me and try and spread philosophies and beliefs which help make the world a better place, you need to choose to not have children. You need to choose to not have children. Also, there are some cultures, like in Islamic culture, they're so into their religion that they love God more than anything. They love it more than their own wife, more than they love morality more than their own children. So if you try and threaten, say, Muslims' children to toe the line, very often it won't work. So children is a much more powerful control tool than you might think. People are very unaware of it. So if you're thinking about having children but you want to help make the world a better place, you need to take that into consideration. Obviously, we all know that money is a control thing. Remember also that dependence is a prerequisite to control. A good way to spot if a person is a bad person or wrong, not just a person but a group or body or party, is that if they ever make strategic moves to make you more dependent on them without a very good excuse, that's always a sure sign that group or party is wrong on, basically. So you need to keep an eye out for that also. And also, in one of my previous posts, I talked about a philosophy about the nature of evil being insidious, and how evil people kind of, well, not I suppose it's not unique to evil people, but evil people had this philosophy that the warriors of the deserts crossed the sand in single file to hide their numbers. It's a good philosophy to remember when dealing with bad people, because when you spread a positive ideology, I have this philosophy that they will come to you. And what I mean by that is evil people will come to you, and they'll do anything they can to distract you from correct beliefs. And the biggest threatening belief I've ever developed in my life is the beliefs in nature philosophy. It really, really threatens us. Really, really scared of it, because it can make a real, real difference. And basically, what happens is when they say they come to you, they will create the illusion that evil people outnumber good people, and they'll surround you, and people with the same opinions will surround you and try to rebuke like your philosophies and your beliefs. And it's with good beliefs in general. Remember, going back to negatives, how people were taught that the mind doesn't understand negatives. So, say for example, if like 99% of the people around you try to discourage you away from, encourage you away from good beliefs, that will make you assume that the majority of people are bad, because you're trained to believe that the mind doesn't understand negatives. So if you look at the negatives, say just because 99% of people are encouraging me away from good beliefs, doesn't mean that 1% of people are good people. It could mean, so it makes you, if you believe that the mind does understand negatives, you'll look for the negative side straight away. It would be in your instinct. So, well, actually, maybe evil people are ganging up on me all around me so that 99% of the time I hear things, it's against my beliefs, to give me the impression that the majority of people are good. So, and what they'll do is they'll kind of try and wear you down to the point where you don't bother trying spreading good ideology anymore, because they try and give you the impression that everyone's warped and twisted and evil, basically. So you really need to watch out. This is quite a common technique of evil people, especially if you're spreading an ideology which is a real threat. And the nature and beliefs is a very, very threatening threat. It's by far the most threatening belief I've ever spread. And I kind of knew I was onto that when I kind of realized it and started spreading it. So try and kind of bear that in mind. Also, another really good piece of advice I can give you is when you're spreading good ideology, never ever waste time preaching to the choir. Remember, the choir can be a bad choir. So, for example, if you try and explain to someone that a person's beliefs in nature go hand in hand, and they argue against that, the most likelihood is you're having a debate with the evil choir. Don't waste your time. You just say you have to agree to disagree, or you have to be sarcastic and say, "Oh, really? Is that so? Okay," and act like you've believed them or something, because they will come to you, and they will come to you in numbers. So you kind of really, really watch out for that. So these are the pieces of advice that I can give you in helping make the world a better place. So anyway, I'll let you guys go now. Again, thank you very, very much for listening to me. I hope you've kind of taken on and understood what I've said. When I post this video to YouTube, I would like you to post some ideas of peaceful ways of making the world a better place, which reminds me, I didn't actually give you that information. My closing things to help make the world a better place, in summary, is not so much what you can do, but also look at what you can't do. Remember the philosophy of negatives. Don't take on identity. Really try to discipline yourself to let go of identity. Another piece of advice is don't join the armies of countries that invade other countries, and try to encourage other people to do the same. Try and help them see the logic in that things like regime change or greater good or preemptive strike or shorten the war by 5 years and save countless lives, these are not excuses to invade our countries. So try and pass on that to people as well, and let them understand that I'd quietly, happily join the army if my country never invades other countries. I don't mind putting my life on the line for defending Queen and country, but if they ask me to go to another land uninvited, that's an invasion. When that happens, you're not putting your life on the line for the right thing, you're killing other people in the name of political ideology when you do that. So that's my 2 pieces of closing advice. So I'll say goodbye, everyone. Thanks for listening to me, and God bless.